Hello and welcome. I'm Ashlyn McKenna, and I will be giving my senior thesis on the history, evolution, and psychological effects of English typography applied in marketing and branding. And I was particularly interested in this subject because of a class that I took last semester about the history of the English language. And that focused more on the oral language, and I wanted to look at the written language, but take it a step further and look at how it has evolved today and how we can apply it in these settings of marketing and branding. So to begin, there are some key terms that I want to define, as I will be using them frequently throughout my research and this presentation. So the first key term is typography, and typography is the style and appearance of printed matter, or in other words, how a letter looks. There are a lot of different fonts, as we know, and that plays into typography. The next word or term is serif. A serif typeface are letters that have little embellishments on the tops and the bottoms of letters, and people can refer to them as the feet of letters or decorative strokes, so they are more decorative and embellished in nature. And then sans serif typefaces literally mean without serif, so they don't have any embellishments. They're very clean cut looking on a page, and I will be giving examples of these in the next few slides. So I wanted to start with a little question. Did you know that typography can alter the way that we view a product or a company? If you think of a product or company that you use frequently or that you like, try to imagine the font that they use and think, how does that alter your perception of that font? Does that make you like their product more or not? An example of this, I found this photo of Google written in two different fonts, and the top one is written in a serif font and the bottom one is written in a sans serif font. And they use the bottom font as their official font logo, as you can tell. But the difference between the two is very striking, and the way that we look at them, you kind of pause and think, well, I think I do, at least personally, I like the bottom one because it resembles a digital online platform more than the top one. The top one looks a little more old-fashioned, and I wanted to show this example because it really exemplifies how we perceive fonts and how it can affect our opinion of that brand or company. So this brings me to my introduction and my thesis statement. So I propose that typefaces and fonts have evolved and have effects on the modern world, especially in how companies or organizations brand themselves. Specifically, serif and sans serif fonts are crucial to marketing strategies for branding in three major companies that I want to analyze. And I chose to look at Target, Whole Foods Market, and Louis Vuitton and analyze their marketing branding strategies. Target represents a retail branding strategy, Whole Foods Market represents a food and grocery strategy, and Louis Vuitton represents a high-end designer strategy. These designated corporations were chosen because they represent a broad or general perspective of branding and marketing for consumer and retail products. So I just really wanted to get a really broad general look into branding within different corporations. And I wanted to discover which font, typeface, serif or sans serif, was better to use, which was more effective, and why. So to do that, I first dived into the history of typography. I wanted to see, where does this all start? How has it evolved? What plays into that? And then I looked at the previous research done on the psychological effects of choosing serif or sans serif fonts, which was very interesting. and then I will get into my research design and talk about my results and findings. So, the history of type is very extensive, and there was a lot to it, so it was hard for me to whittle it down. But I decided to start by talking today about how there was a book called A History of the Old English Letter Foundries by Talbot Baines Reed. And this book was written in 1887, and I really enjoyed reading this book because it gave a glimpse into that time frame of how type was perceived, the technologies behind how different letter designs were created, and he talks extensively about this. Specifically, he talked about how English letter foundries, or places where people could take their literature material and get it printed at a specific foundry and choose a specific letter design, or they would commission someone to design a new font for that book. So that's what English letter foundries were. And he talked about the ones that were in Europe at that time, clear back in time till about the 1400s, so he covered quite a bit. But what I found intriguing was his mention of how letter designs were inconsistent through the years because there were so many English letter foundries, and because of the technology at the time, each foundry had a different set of fonts. And so if you wanted a certain font, you had to travel different distances to find that specific font. And in his words, this was an issue that occurred between them and caused irregular and ununiform bodies. He then goes into talking about how serif fonts were mainly used from the 1400s through the beginning of the 1900s. Well, he talked about till the end of the 1800s because that's when the book was written. But people really enjoyed using serif fonts because they were more ornamental and resembled a very professional and even royal atmosphere and feeling to those fonts. Other research that I did in the history of typeface included the first official design of a sans serif typeface, and that was designed by William Caslon IV in 1816. And sans serif fonts were not very popular in the 1800s and even early 1900s until there was a shift in technology. After World War II, in the 1950s and 60s, there was this desire and need for change after such a chaotic and terrible war. And people in all avenues, all aspects of everything, were looking for refreshing new designs in marketing and branding, and that included typography. And they actually, in the typography world, have a term called typographical reform or modernism in the 1950s and 60s because of the aftermath of World War II. And because of the shift in technology as well, we went from clearback printing press to typewriters, and then electrical typewriters, computers, the digital age. That really sped up the design of letters and typography. And I specifically wanted to talk about the creation of the Helvetica font. It's a very prevalent font in everything we see. It's on road signs, businesses, and everywhere you look you can find a Helvetica font. And it's a sans serif typeface. And I watched a documentary called Helvetica, and they talked about this reform and need for a cleanup, and it symbolized just that, a refreshing typeface to look at in businesses after World War II. So, diving deeper into my previous research of sans serif and serif typefaces, I found that marketing products and brands are all heavily impacted by the font choices that they use, and studies have been conducted on behalf of serif and sans serif typeface choices and how they affect literacy or perception. So 2 scholars, John R. Doyle and Paul A. Bottomley, did a study, and it focused on how we perceive fonts in association with a product. And their findings were very interesting. They said participants were more likely to choose a brand if it was in a font that had an obvious association with the product category. Fonts certainly convey their own meanings, which meaning is dependent upon the appropriateness of the font in relation to the product or branding. So if we go back to the Google example, I think we're more likely to use Google as a search engine if it looks trendy, modern, up-to-date, and their font choice really encapsulates those 3 things. And that's what they found, is that we'll use a font if it correlates with the product directly. So we create perceptions and judgments of typeface without even realizing it. Another study that was done was by Elizabeth Dresler, and she did a study on the memorability of serif and sans serif typefaces. She wanted to see if there was a difference in memory recall, and she found that serif fonts are more memorable and easier to recall because of deepened cognitive processing due to the little embellishments that serif typefaces have. So as you can see in the little red circle on the serif side, that little embellishment or stroke has a huge impact on how we remember fonts. And they also provide an implied line to follow, which elicits easier reading. So the little lines on the bottom just kind of create that line for our eyes to follow. She also found that serif fonts were considered to be more old-fashioned looking, serious, and traditional. Sans serif fonts, according to Jan Tischold and other authors, and the Helvetica documentary, are preferable in modern settings because it is the typeface of the modern age. They are more refreshing, smooth, and look contemporary. New York University did a study as well, and they had people read 2 different articles that were written in a serif font and a sans serif font, and they found that people interpreted the serif font as the content sounded more angry and serious, which I found quite interesting. And they didn't really give results for the sans serif font. It seemed like a lot of the feedback they got was really different between everyone. But I really enjoyed reading this study because it just shows that there is an emotional effect when choosing a typeface. So onto my research design, I chose to approach my research with an interpretivistic goal, meaning I just wanted to understand how typefaces interact with people and then learn which one was best. And to accomplish this, I chose to do a document analysis. So I took the previous research, and some of which I shared with you, and I drew conclusions from those research articles and books and journals. And these conclusions I titled as my guiding principles to help my analysis of the corporation branding, logos, and their websites in looking at their typefaces. So my guiding principles, the conclusions that I got from the research, are as follows. And I started with serif and then sans serif. So serif fonts tend to have a more serious, old-fashioned, stable, practical, mature, and formal undertone to it. They're also more memorable in the viewer's eye and elicit ease of reading due to the little embellishments on the tops and bottoms of the letters that create implied lines to follow. And then for sans serif fonts, they were seen as more modern, simplistic, refreshing, and clean. They do not provide good memory recall as well as serif fonts can. And sans serif fonts are better for short messages because they are not as distracting on the page and can convey information very easily. So let's look at the first corporation that I analyzed. I looked at Target first, and I decided to read their mission statement to help guide my research. And they said that their mission statement is the promise of surprises, fun, ease, and inspiration at every turn, no matter when, where, or how you shop. That quest is to bring joy. To bring joy is at the center of every business decision we make. So that last part caught my eye because they said every business decision, which includes their font and branding. So I looked at that, and their font choice for their logo is Helvetica New. And like I mentioned before, this was a very, very trendy font during that typographical reform in the 1950s and 60s, and very, very sought after. And Helvetica was designed in Switzerland, so a lot of people in Europe started using it first, and then it quickly came to the United States. And within the Helvetica documentary, 2 typographers were interviewed within the documentary, and their names were Hoffer and Swan, and they both agreed with each other that that font in particular invited open interpretation to the viewer, and it was clean, official, and efficient. So for Target to use and choose this font during that time, they caught onto the tidal wave of the trend, and that helped them become very memorable and helped create their brand identity, making it modern, trendy, and simple all at the same time. Looking at the sans serif font, I think that this font choice, it being so simple, allows for customers to not focus so much on the typography that they use, but on their products, on their brand, on what their marketing is all about. And the guiding principle that I wanted to highlight, even though I used all of them, I'll share one for time's sake. I wanted to highlight from my analysis is the one about memory recall. So sans serif fonts are not as memorable, but in some ways I think that this was actually very advantageous to Target in their branding and marketing, because the sans serif font choice takes the attention away from the letters themselves and brings the direction of your eyes right back to the bullseye. And that's what we think of when we think of Target, their bullseye logo. And so that becomes very memorable. And it's interesting because many of their stores today, some of them don't even have Target written on the outside of their building, it's just the bullseye. So I thought that was pretty impressionable. So all in all, I think that the sans serif choice was very smart and helps create their brand identity and help customers to have an open interpretation and see them as modern and trendy and simple. Moving to Whole Foods Market, this one was interesting because they incorporate both serif and serif font choices in their branding. Their branding mission statement from their visual branding guidelines packet says that they characterize their branding choices by three characteristics. The first is that the design must be organic looking in nature. The second is that it must be fun. And the third is that it needs to be real or personable. These branding characteristics seem to provide the perfect recipe for mixing a traditional atmosphere with a new age, modern feel. Choosing to implement both serif and sans serif typeface choices helps blend the traditional with the modern age in the following ways. So the serif typeface choice on the top is written with the Whole Foods, and it's written in the font called Winchester New ITC. And this font was originally designed to resemble old style figures. So I think that their choice in using that was very deliberate in wanting to resemble, hey, we're a traditional family-centered place to come, buy food. And the sans serif font that they chose that's written in the market portion of the logo is written in WFM, which stands for Whole Foods Market, WFM Scala Sans Spring. So this font was specifically altered and tailored for Whole Foods Market to bring modernity and clarity to their brand identity. Placing these two fonts next to each other helps complement the concept of bringing the modern and trendy to the classic and organic feel. And I think that the contrast also helps a lot with not crowding the logo. The sans serif font of Market and the smaller size helps to emphasize the Whole Foods portion of the logo as well. So the psychological effect that happens in our minds has to do with the guiding principle about serif fonts being more memorable. And I touched on this a little bit, but I think that choice of the Winchester New ITC serif font helps us to internalize those two words and remember it, and the sans serif font choice on the bottom for Market, again, just complements the Whole Foods portion. And the message that we gathered from this logo is very obvious. Hey, we sell Whole Foods. And that's exactly what they want people to know. So overall, I feel like they really utilize the principles, the guiding principles that I came up with, and they provide a good presence in their design choices to help customers psychologically see their branding as fun, organic, old-fashioned, and modern all at the same time. The last corporation is Louis Vuitton, and this one was fun just because they're a very well-known brand, high-end fashion, and their mission statement for the organization seeks to embody unique savoir-faire, which means confidence in society, a carefully preserved heritage, and dynamic engagement with the modern to represent the most refined qualities of Western art de vivre, the art of living, around the world, to be synonymous with both elegance and creativity, and to blend tradition and innovation and kindle dream with fantasy. I thought that was a very beautiful mission statement.
No wonder it's expensive. That's for a mission statement.
So, their logo uses both serif and sans serif font choices. The serif font choice is written in their monogram, the LV, and it actually does not have a name. I could not find it. It was handwritten for this company. And this is the only instance that they use serif typeface at all. So on their website, it's all sans serif. This is the only time that they use serif, which I found very interesting. And it was inspired by Georgia and Roman fonts from the research that I did. And then the sans serif font choice they use is called Futura Medium, and that's what is written in the words Louis Vuitton. And they specifically talk about this in their branding book, their visual branding guidelines. And they say that they use it because it is by definition the typeface of today and tomorrow. It is considered one of the most significant typefaces for functionality and legibility within the 20th century. So right there, they're claiming, hey, we're a brand that wants to emulate the present and looking to the future, catching on with the trends, creating our own trends. And the monogram, the serif font, I think ties into when they talked about preserving their heritage in their mission statement. So they bring these two concepts together in one logo all at the same time with their typeface choices. It's very clear that they were conscientious of their typographical choices to coincide with their mission statement of the traditional ideals of heritage and with progressive concepts of today and the future. The principle I wanted to highlight is about how serif fonts are seen as old-fashioned, stable, practical, mature, and formal. So like I've talked about a little bit before, The monogram seems to shout their ideals of tradition and heritage, and typographer Lentis shares that differing fonts that stem from Roman fonts, like this monogram, always seem to result in designs that look exquisite, and I think that they accomplished that here with their design. So, for my results, which is better to use, serif and serif, I found that the choice between the two is dependent upon the atmosphere, message, identity, and products that a company wants to convey or sell. So it just is totally dependent on the situation of a corporation or company and what their branding goals are. And that serif fonts are best for old-fashioned traditional atmospheres, and sans serif fonts are best for modern contemporary atmospheres. Future research for this project, I would love to do a quantitative or qualitative study on this, which is just gathering more concrete data to support my document analysis. And ways that I could accomplish this are surveys or focus groups, asking questions, gathering statistics. And that concludes my research. Thank you very much.